Hello, this is Millennium, and welcome to the final edition of Squaretember. Well, at least until I get to the critical part, that is. This part is pretty much what I like to call the silver age of Japanese role-playing games. Why? Because at that time, MMORPGs were actually starting to make its way to the mainstream, like EverQuest and RuneScape, for example. And eventually include Final Fantasy XI, which I have not played, and pretty much which will later be preceding what is known as the greatest MMORPG of all time and most addicting, World of Warcraft, of course. But before all that, console RPGs still dominated. We'll cover the ones the Square titles I have played all the way up until they merged with Enix. And to start this all off in chronological order, let's pick the successor to Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross. See, unlike its predecessor, this one, of course, was 3D, being on the PlayStation, and it used a completely different art style, along with full motion videos that are CG instead of traditionally drawn, like in the PS1 release of Chrono Trigger. However, taking place 20 years after Chrono Trigger in the present timeline, we have an entirely new cast of characters. In fact, about over 40 recruitable party members in all that you can recruit throughout the story. However, you're unable to recruit all of them through a single playthrough, and I'll get to that in a second. However, unlike Chrono Trigger, which involves time traveling to different periods, this actually focuses on traveling to different dimensions, one of which are another world and home world, which is really the result of altered timelines that Chrono himself was involved with. How the story starts off with a new hero named Surge, who lives in a tropical village in an island chain called El Nido, which is really where the entire game takes place. In fact, you're not able to revisit the old locations from Chrono Trigger, even though it's just off the coast of the Zenin mainland. However, I really like the approach that they, and the art style they actually took to the tropical setting of the game. It sort of reminds me of, the artistic approaches that they took in Final Fantasy X and the beginning of Kingdom Hearts. However, it starts off when he's collecting dragon scales for his childhood friend and girlfriend, that he stumbles upon an alternate dimension. There he meets, who is actually, Scala's, cloned daughter, Kid. Yes, that's her real name. Who actually grew up in the orphanage with one of the major characters from Chrono Trigger, Luca. However, she has a big grudge against, some Lynx demi-human named, oddly enough, Lynx, who burned down the orphanage she was raised in, and including Luca, who was killed. In fact, I think all three of the main characters probably died, because you later see their childhood apparitions on Espaza Beach, and are there for some reason. So it could have still been likely that they were alive in one dimension yet, but in the altered timeline they died, because you'll find out with the ending with Chrono Trigger, you'll find out in one of the endings that Dalton from Zeal took over, and with the poor army or something like that. Now again, like its predecessor, it again has multiple endings, and there's so many Easter eggs you can actually unlock. And there are several instances where Lynx actually tries to kill Kid, the lead female character. First, he tries poisoning her with hydra venom which is really extinct in their dimension, and it could really be a tree from a dead hydra. And this is ultimately the turning point of who you can recruit in your party, whether or not you can choose to decide to save Kid or not. However, this does not change Kid's fate. She lives either way, whether you decide to save her or not. Ironically, because if you choose not to save her, which I never took that option until very recently, she finds out that she has basically been cured by someone else who fetched the antidote. Well, I don't really want to go through all the characters because there's so many characters, and if I name all this review will go on forever, but I'll try to get passed by as quickly as I can. However, the other encounter she has with Lynx actually involves him switching bodies with Surge or something like that, and he actually ends up stabbing her. However, after they switch bodies to their respective selves, of course, we find out what really happened to Princess Scala when Chrono interfered with the timeline. It turns out that she was actually trapped in a dimensional void where she aged backwards and produced a kid as her clone. And somehow in the time this all happened, she somehow Benjamin Buttoned herself and lost all her blue hair. Yes, because she looks like absolutely nothing like she did in Chrono Trigger. How the hell that happened is still a mystery. However, I would recommend checking Chrono Cross out. I mean, you can get it on the PlayStation Network nowadays. I wonder if they'll basically ever bring it to the PS4's virtual compatibility. If they do, well, check it out one day. Now jumping on to Square's last major PS1 title would be Final Fantasy IX. Now, ironically, it was actually originally supposed to be a spin-off. Yeah, it was actually a year after it began production that the game would actually receive a Roman numeral, prompting the successor to 8 to bump up into the 10th slot. The release dates for both North America and Japan were nearly simultaneously. Only 3 months apart exactly. It actually ended up going back to the series' roots. Unlike 7 and 8, they actually went back to 4 party members. And the setting was back to the traditional medieval and Renaissance setting. Again, with the same steampunk technology seen in Final Fantasy VI. And of course, it had the most diverse cast of characters. Only 2 of the 8 were actual humans. That's not including the guest characters. Anyway, let's get on to the story. The most important part of any title we review. The story starts out in a typical, traditional, old-school Final Fantasy way. Except this time you have a band of thieves, who are trying to kidnap the princess under the request of the King of Lindblum. Princess Garnet's mom, Queen Braun, who is like the ugliest Smurf queen you'll probably ever see. I mean, look at her blue skin! It's even the same color as one of the playable characters, Amaranth. I mean, is there a race of blue-skinned human beings in this world? I mean, that's what I've always questioned. Despite the fact that there's a lot of, humanoid animals, especially the Burmesians, which are rat men. And you're probably figuring out, why the fuck does the main character have a tail? Well, to tell you the truth, it's part of his race. Yes, he's half human, half monkey. Well, no, they're what's called, genomes, which is a race created in the neighboring planet Terra, and so they're technically clones of each other. And Zidane, the main character, which is Zidane Tribal, yes, that's how it's pronounced, a lot like the retired French football player Zinedine Zidane. It turns out these beings, including the main antagonist, who is obviously a flamboyant metrosexual, is actually created by this demigod from the other planet named Garland. Yet, see any allusions to the original Final Fantasy? Since it shares the same name as its antagonist? Well, he created the genome race, and he was oddly dumb enough to actually clone themselves, and actually give them tails, because that was probably the only way he could distinguish them from actual human beings from Terra. Anyway, Zidane is with this group of thieves called Tantalus, and they do their job under the disguise of theater acting. And this is how they try to kidnap the Princess Garnet at her birthday party. And surprisingly, she's actually willing to come, because she has some quarrel against her mother, since she's been acting really weird, and in fact, you'll actually find out why. She's actually not the real princess. She's actually a summoner from the summoning village, and yet sees the opportunity to extract these summons from her to conquer the world. Yes, it's pretty much defined by bloodlust and greed. Which then goes on to play a very important role in the story. I mean, it starts out really cartoonish. Yeah, since the along with the very cartoony graphics, since everyone looks like pretty much a bobblehead. But then gets very serious. In fact, you'll actually see some similarities to a lot of old school NES Final Fantasies, to pretty much the hardcore gamers who had stuck to the series from game 1. But for that I didn't care, because it was unique from the original Final Fantasy I've played, like 7 and 8. I didn't realize this is what most Final Fantasies were actually like until a lot later. So that was a pretty interesting twist they put on there. That even though the cast is not customizable as it once was in 6, 7, 8, and 5, you could still learn some good skills that can pretty much balance out your battle strategy and your party. They pretty much have along with a lot of very powerful skills besides summon, so only limiting the summoner and healing job to certain people doesn't really sound that bad at all, because there's no because unlike its predecessor 8, you have the good old armor and weapons and accessories back. They brought the MP back. There's no drawing magic, and there's of course no junctioning bullcrap in 9 or 10 for that matter. I guess Square really listened to the fans' complaint of the junctioning system and the whole drawing magic, but there's still Tetramaster. Now, depending on your opinion, it's either more difficult or more hard. But I kind of digress. I think they're both the same. But luckily in Tetramaster, there is no going town to town trying to change rules. Because in 8, in Triple Triad, they can pretty much cheat and make up whatever dumb rule they want, including the random rule and direct, which in 8 could really kill your chances of getting a really rare card. In fact, what also made Final Fantasy IX pretty special was the number of side quests you could do, and the number of hours you could spend on it much later in the game. And you pretty much use it to, of course, the Chocobo Hot and Cold game, where you had to find treasures based on a particular clues on different maps on where it might be. And you pretty much use this to get characters' ultimate weapons and armors, and you fight this big mega boss called Ozma. Unlike 7 and 8, 9 never got a PC port, and as a result, it's very unlikely it would make it to Steam, but still out there for digital distribution on the PlayStation Network, and eventually might make its way to the PS4 on the PlayStation Now service, if it ever lives this long. Now, as they were moving on to the PlayStation 2, the series has pretty much gone on through quite a bit of changes, and of course, Square actually lost a lot of funding. See, right before the release of Final Fantasy X in Japan, they started a movie studio called Square Pictures, which pretty much dissolved after the financial failure of Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, and you can pretty much check that piece of shit movie out in one of my other reviews. Even after that train wreck bombed in theaters and sank their film studio, you could pretty much say that Spirits Within was the official start of Square's downward spiral, but you might not have noticed it with the release of Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts. And speaking of 10, you'll actually find out something brand new that they've never done before in most Japanese role-playing games. They talk!
Listen to my story. This may be our last chance.
I promised Braska.
You promised my father?
Told you, Sir Aaron's the best.
I could have done that.
This was the first game in the series to actually use voice acting. In fact, it was one of the few games at the time that actually used it throughout the entire game. And even in the in-game cutscenes. But the downside of it, that since it used so much of it, and one of the first games to even to give voice acting a more cinematic appeal and approach, you pretty much had a lot of errors going on in the recording, like the infamous laughing sequence. Oh God. But from this, directors have actually learned to pretty much improve. This pretty much set the stage for improvement of voice acting later on. Sorry, Kefka's laugh from Final Fantasy VI does not count as voice acting. However, in the past, when this was brand new, this is actually my second favorite Final Fantasy simply because of how similar the cast and storyline was had a lot of similarities to that of Final Fantasy VII, my personal favorite. But unlike 7 and 6, which in my heart keeps getting better and better as I get older, I can increasingly see more of the flaws with 10. Besides the
You probably shouldn't laugh anymore.
You'll pretty much find out there's no more overworld map. No, and there's no free flying. That was a pretty big shock to me. And the fact that you cannot skip the cutscenes, and you still cannot do it in the HD re-release. I don't know why they did not add that feature. Because if you watch the same cutscene again and again, especially after you get stuck on a boss, that gets pretty annoying from time to time. And also the main villain Seymour. I mean, who designed his hair? I mean, I can really understand Spoonie's criticism and mocking of his hairstyle. But for men, I don't think that's even hair. Now, the cast is memorable. However, this was the first game to actually screw up who's the main character, because Titus, yes, that's how it's pronounced. It's not Titus. Because this was actually the last game where you got to name the protagonist, and it was only him. But it was completely removed from the series because it would pretty much get in the way of voice acting. But Titus was really just a dream person from which is pretty much it's hard to explain, but they're pretty much just a different race. They're pretty much individuals who live in the parallel world of Spira. It's pretty much cut off from the rest of Spira. Yeah, it's basically the parallel world of Spira is the dream world. And the dream world is pretty much created by by Yui Yevon and these ghost-like spirits called the Faith. It pretty much uses a lot more organized religion than a Final Fantasy game. You can say as you want, pretty much attacking Final Fantasy's pagan stance and being anti-religion from all you crazy evangelical fundamentalists. It's not a real religion. There's no need to be upset about it. Now, despite all the flaws, does this mean it's a bad game? Oh, hell no! Far from it, in fact. What pretty much irritates some old-timers is pretty much they eliminated the active time battle system and replaced it with the conditional turn-based. But it was still turn-based nonetheless, in a traditional way. And it was the very last one to use turn-based, and to be turn-based. And because of this, you can pretty much see that this is basically where the Final Fantasy franchise started to go downhill. Especially the fact that this was actually the first one to spawn a direct sequel. And once I get to the direct sequel, which I won't have time for this year, you can pretty much see why this was Final Fantasy's start to a downward spiral. But either way, it still is worth something to check out. Especially the HD re-release, which they're probably going to release digitally on the PS4. Or the Xbone, depending on Square Enix's decision, since they're now releasing their games cross-platform. Including the third title of the new series that I'm going to review next. It's a new series that originally began as a spin-off, but was not expected to do well and become its own franchise. And that is Kingdom Hearts. Yes, the guilty pleasure of Disney and Final Fantasy crossover, controlled by an original cast of characters, and even on some original worlds, despite the fact that there's also some Disney worlds you can travel to, and that look more like planets. In fact, screwed up planets that are pretty much just scaled out of proportion. But who cares? It's Disney. Well, Square had some Disney magic with it. So, cartoon logic applies. So, Kingdom Hearts, it's pretty much an atypical approach Square took. Yes, it pretty much started when the executives of Square met in the same elevator as some Disney executives. They decided that it was a good idea to come up with a game together. And the product is Kingdom Hearts. Well, anyone who pretty much follows the franchise religiously knows the whole story behind it. And it's the brainchild of none other than well-known Final Fantasy veteran Tetsuya Nomura. And this would actually be the last mainline title that Square would produce before merging with Enix in 2003. Before this even came out, there was not a lot of hype surrounding it, because based on the premise of it being a Square Enix game with Disney characters in it, people in the US thought it was going to bomb. And hell no, it did not! Despite the fact that I even remember seeing some odd marketing campaigns on the Disney Channel. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it involved some kid going into some laboratory to find out the top secret preview of Kingdom Hearts. And he's like, oh, so it's actually being in a movie. Dumb kid. It's not exactly like that. It's more complex. It has a whole original story behind it. If anyone can find that commercial, that would be a Disney Channel commercial on like YouTube or Retro Junk. That would be great, because I have yet to make fun of it. I remember saying, oh my god, this game looks like a joke. There's no way Squaresoft can make it. The makers of Final Fantasy know better. And then it pretty much started with my older brother bringing it home from a friend's house. And I'm like, what is that? And then all of a sudden, when he was playing it, I'm like, oh my god. It's completely different than what the television thought it was. I'm like, holy crap, is that Selphie? Is that Tidus? Is that Waka? And I looked on the box. Holy crap, it's made by the same people as Final Fantasy, so it has Final Fantasy characters in. Oh my god, I fell in love with this series. The story starts out with 3 teenagers, Sora and his friends Riku and Kairi, trying to discover worlds by sailing off their island planet Destiny Islands. I don't know how that's supposed to work, but after Sora's world is destroyed by some dark-shadowed, heartless creatures, he actually ends up in a completely original world, Traverse Town. and there he meets other Final Fantasy favorites like Squall, Yuffie, Aerith, Cid, and eventually in the Greek Colosseum world, Cloud and Sephiroth. And after all that, you finally get to explore Disney World, as that stupid kid in the commercial said. But not only did you actually explore Disney World, they were actually smart enough not to follow the movies too closely. I mean, it was something new for people to try. In fact, it actually had a whole story behind it. It was pretty much this complex fantasy concept of light and darkness, and in people's hearts and stuff like that. And also how important Sora, Kairi, and Riku are to the story. And also we would find out their potential of becoming Keyblade Masters themselves in the long-anticipated Kingdom Hearts 3, after I review its sequel, Kingdom Hearts 2. So, without further ado, I wrap up this year's Squaretember, but not before I review some of the bad stuff that was released. This is Millennium, signing off.